ladies, and welcome to Homemaker Radio, a place that you can come and listen to. I'm just so honored that you chose to use this to listen while you work. And it's also for any of you who have children. If you would like to have a homeschool lesson, I am a veteran homeschooler, and I still have a lot of things that I want to read or tell, and there just isn't enough time, is there? Some of you who are older know that time. Where'd the time go? It went so fast, I wasn't really finished. But before you go to work, you start doing the things that you do. I want to show you my teacup for today. It's by a company called Brewed to a Tea. Kind of goes with my outfit today. And I'm sitting in the young men's room that I created out of a tiny, tiny space. I got some furniture in here, but I don't think I'll be getting it out again. It's pretty wedged in there. And enjoying, it's probably one of my favorite rooms. And I have, by taking shirts and pieces of fabric, created the colors that I wanted and wrapped them around old pillows so that I could create the look that I wanted. And today I would like to talk about a couple of things. If you are new here, please go over and subscribe on my blog. I have provided a link. You can listen to this video over there, and then you can have a better atmosphere, plus see what else I've posted along with this video. These videos will come up. If you will subscribe, then you'll get the whole article, including the video. And it just works out so much better that way. And I also wanted you to know that if this isn't long enough for you to get something done, you can click continuous play over on the left over there on that page and listen to the one that I did previously. Now, I don't edit anything because I'm used to doing, over the years, have done classes in my home for ladies and participated in them, and we never edited what we said to each other. We just kind of filtered out or corrected ourselves. And so it's a conversational style, and it won't always be 100% accurate, but it's just my opinion, and it's just to keep you motivated while you work. I remember in the 1950s, in the olden days, how we used to turn the radio on. Our mothers used to turn the radio on while they washed dishes, and that's one of the scenes that I remember so well. And they always had a kitchen window, and they could look out and see who was driving up to their property and that little garden out there that they could watch grow, so they knew what was up or what was gone. And one of my favorite movies is The Magic of Ordinary Days, and it's a Hallmark movie, I believe probably set in the 1930s, maybe 40s. And one of the scenes, they got some of those scenes quite accurate, I have to say, because I remember them in my mind. One of the scenes that I enjoyed so much is Livy listening to the radio while she snapped the green beans. And she was just kind of dancing around and looking out the window while she did it. She was standing over the sink in the kitchen. And so this is what this is for, so that you can listen as you go. And so today I wanted to talk a little bit first about your appearance and how important that is. And even if you are alone, please get up and get dressed and fix your face and your hair. And even if you aren't going to see anybody, just do it, because you're a human being, not an animal. You know, this is so different. Human beings have a little more stake in their appearance, and it's so important as a symbol of your gratefulness to be alive, and to our Creator, who we owe so much to because of the life that He has given us. Many of us, especially in the West, who have been so blessed. And so today I'd like to tell you that it's so good to have some. I have my favorite things that I listen to as I go. Sometimes I'll put in a DVD and just listen as I walk through the house, because I know the script and I don't need to watch it. And but this is something that you can do too. And if you need more, I'll provide links for other things that you can listen to that are very encouraging. And so today the forecast for me is pretty good. It's pouring rain outside. We're in the middle of a winter that has had a lot of rain and cold, but the forecast is good for me because I got my refrigerator cleaned out. My house is pretty clean. There are some details I've written down that I want to go back to, but generally it could survive a house tour if certain rooms were shut off. there are still a couple of rooms that are not really show worthy yet that I would that I have to kind of guard. And I have a folding screen, which is so handy because you can block off a laundry room that doesn't have a door, or a certain area that you don't want people to look at. So today I'm expecting a few people to come over and do a bit of a house tour. I've decorated it all for Christmas, and wanted to talk to you a little bit about Christmas, because there are some people that don't celebrate it and don't believe in it, and I think it's kind of a hard to, when you have children especially, they need to have a nice, at least a nice holiday where they're getting family time and a few presents, and where mother cares enough to light the house up, especially in the northern hemisphere where we need some light and we need a little bit of sparkle, because it's you know that song, We Need a Little Christmas. It gets so dark, and those lights are so helpful. And I remember growing up on the homestead in Alaska, how people would put their lights up in October, because that's when the darkness started coming, and they'd leave them there till February. It was very important, and those lights on the snow were so important. And I remember the Eskimos had the parkas, and the parkas, they would take so much time sewing those little beads around the fur that went around the face. Those colored beads, I always wondered, why did they spend so much time sewing all that stuff around? And in the dark, coming through a snowstorm, you could see the face of the other person because of those beads. And we need this. We need the light. We need the decor. And some people go way all out, and some people have only just a few things, but it's very important, I think, to celebrate it as a family holiday, even if you don't celebrate it as a religious holiday. Now, I realize the importance of the religion behind it, because sometimes this is the only time that people outside of Christ are going to hear about him. This is the only time they're going to understand some of this story, and it's very important, and Mr. S always has a sermon connected to it, because that's when visitors come. That's when people come, and this is a time when they can hear the gospel too. So that's one of the reasons that we observe it. And in the ancient times, after Christ had already risen, and several hundred years later, it was found that people were observing his birth and his death and resurrection. And so it's very important that that story gets out. Sometimes people tend to go through life neglecting that story. That story is just the beginning, though. It's really easy to love a tiny little innocent baby, isn't it? But to understand Jesus as a grown man is so important. And so that story should continue on to his sacrifice, his death, and his resurrection, and what his kingdom was, and how he came into his kingdom, and how important it is for Christians to think of him as daily, and to have him in their life. Whereas I think people that only celebrate Christmas, only see Christ as a baby, are missing out on a lot. So I just wanted to tell you that, how important that is, because it's the beginning of teaching people, and especially children, for them to have this lesson in their lives once a year is very important. And I know that some of us, are a bit conflicted about it, because when we get around people that don't want to celebrate it or don't believe in it, and yet they're nice Christian people, it's sometimes we don't want to offend them, so we don't. So we kind of hold back on some of our celebrations. I don't know if you ever have felt like that, but as preacher's wife, I have been through it, and finally decided that the way that I wanted to do it, and the way that it was best for my family. Now, Edgar A. Guest was somebody that I have been reading. He did have a few poems about special religious holidays, and I wanted to talk to you a little bit about that, because one of the things that a tyrannical government will do is they will take away your religious holidays. Now, even those of you who do not believe, you're Christians, but you don't believe in having any particular religious holidays, have to be quite alarmed about that, because they will start saying that the first day of the week, or the day of the week that you worship, is a religious holiday, and they will take that away too. So we have to defend these religious holidays and not allow them to take them away. And one of the ways that they'll do it is they'll change the calendar. Remember when I read you that lesson about the French Revolution and how they changed the calendar so that it was 8-day week or something like that, and they left out the day of worship, the first day of the week or something, and it was they padlocked all the church building doors. And you might think, well, that's fine, we could just worship at home. But when they start scrunching down on you and start taking away your places of worship, some of us just have little places that we go that we rent to worship so that it could hold a crowd, And when they start scrunching down on that, but then they allow some of the more worldly places to stay open, that's not right, and that's tyranny, and that is communists want to control everybody's life down, even inside your house. And so I think Christmas is so important because it's kind of telling them that there's more to life than their agenda. So today I'm going to read to you a little bit, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about something called sympathy. Sympathy was something that I had such a hard time with. When you don't feel sympathetic, how to offer sympathy. This was something I had a hard time with because with my own friends and family that I knew well and that my heart was bound to, I could easily feel the sympathy, and I could easily weep with those who weep. But then I married a preacher, and there were people in the congregation who had loved ones who had died that we had to go and attend, and so I had to learn this kind of a formula or protocol for offering sympathy. And then I also had a lot more of a fellowship and association with other women that most women don't have. Even the church members don't have so much of it as I did. And so I had to learn what was sympathy and what wasn't sympathy. And some of it I had experienced, things that people say that are just not sympathetic at all. And there was one particular one I wanted to bring up to you today. I'm not going to go into all of it. And there's some things that you don't say that just may seem sympathetic, but they're not to the ear of the other person. And so I'll read you a couple of poems from Edgar A. Guest today, and then I will talk a little bit about sympathy. And I'm also going to read some more from the American Government and Economics in Christian Perspective. This is so important. If you can get a hold of that, doesn't matter if you get the teacher's manual or the student's manual, both are really, really good. The student's manual is fine too. It'll all have the answers in it. Okay, Edgar A. Guest. This is called, and this is, I find a lot of his poems were directed to a son, I think. So if you can get a hold of his book, and somebody ought to print all of his poems separately in a book for boys and young men, because I'm telling you, it's all about life is so full of trouble, so how are you going to, here's how you're going to manage it. And I think today people, especially when you're really young, you think, I know because I'm really young, and I think, well, this shouldn't be happening, life should go good for me, why is this happening? And but this is written in the 1930s and maybe early 1940s, and they had a whole different attitude toward it. So this is called There Will Always Be Something to Do. And this is great for the homemaker, I think. And I hope you're not sitting here watching me unless you're not feeling well. But I hope eventually, one thing is when I'm not feeling well, I'll lay there for a while and I'll start looking around, and then inspiration, I guess because my body's more rested, my mind is more rested, I'll just lay there and I'll say, that wall needs to be painted, or that thing needs to be moved. I think I'll change this around, and I need to change the whatever, or I need to sweep, and I'll start feeling a little more interested in my home because of the rest. And that's why I think rest is such a great rejuvenator for your mind and for your ideals. People lose their inspiration sometimes or lose their motivation. Rest might be what you're lacking. And exercise, I'm still taking those chair exercise where you lean over here and touch your toes, and but you don't lose your balance. And I am amazed at what it has done for me. For example, I don't need too many notes anymore because I'm starting to recall a little bit better, recall my thoughts a little bit better. And it's like it freed up a pinched nerve in my brain. So ladies, there will always be something to do. And you know, these are great poems for children who get discouraged. And one of the most successful poems, I think, is Somebody Said It Couldn't Be Done. I have printed that out many times, handwritten it out for a child or a grandchild that had the habit of being discouraged or tended to be discouraged. I wished I'd had it when I was younger. These poems are just now surfacing. They weren't as available because, of course, they were, you had to have a place to go to find them, a store that would stock them. And nowadays we have the internet. We can just go find out where they are and order them. And so this might not be the complete book of poems from Edgar S. Someone gave this to me. But it has a lot of them in here. Okay. There will always be something to do. There will always be something to do, my boy. There will always be wrongs to right. There will always be need for a manly breed and men unafraid to fight. There will always be honor to guard, my boy. There will always be hills to climb and tasks to do and battles new from now to the end of time. There will always be dangers to face, my boy. There will always be goals to take. Men shall be tried when the roads divide and proved by the choice they make. There will always be burdens to bear, my boy. There will always be need to pray. There will always be tears through the future years as loved ones are borne away. There will always be God to serve, my boy, and always the flag above. They shall call to you until life is through for courage and strength and love. So these are things that I dream, my boy, and have dreamed since your life began. And whatever befalls when the old world calls, it shall find you a sturdy man. You know, it was talking here about, let me just see, men are unafraid to fight. Now that does not always mean that people will physically fight and draw blood, but you have got to fight with your voice. And I think that's so important. And I have, over the years, been rather astonished at some people who would not stand up for what is right when something wrong was being told about someone else. They knew the truth, but they wouldn't say anything. And they'd say, well, I can't do anything about it. Well, what do you want me to do? Hit him? Or, they just exaggerate and say, oh, well, what do you want me to do? Kill him? What do you want me to do? And I would say, well, why don't you correct this person and tell them that what they are saying about this other person is not true, or this event, or about this issue is not true. And they would say, because I can't change him, and what do you want me to do? Just beat him up or something. And they would, and their reasoning was so strange. But he was saying here about men unafraid to fight. If you say it, if you tell somebody something, at least you said it, and then they will know, and they will have some knowledge, and at least you said it. But when you don't say it, you're letting people get away with things that aren't right. And it reminds me of the Quiet Man. He was not going to fight Mary Kate's brother at all, and she wanted him to, because he didn't really care about the money that he was keeping from her. But he said, well, I don't care about it. And she said, yes, but he does, and that's the point. So at one point, he had to go and get this money that belonged to her because her brother believed that, he believed differently, and it was all about, it's really basically about belief, and so he was talking to this young man of men being unafraid to fight. Well, all of us have to be unafraid to stand up for what's right. And so now I want to read another one here called There's No Use Sighing, by Edgar S. No use frettin' when the rain comes down, no use grievin' when the gray clouds frown, no use sighin' when the wind blows strong, no use wailin' when the world's all wrong. Only thing a man can do is work and wait till the sky gets blue. No use moping when you lose your game. No use sobbing if you're free from shame. No use crying when the harm is done. Just keep on trying and working on. Only thing for a man to do is take the loss and begin anew. No use weeping when the milk is spilled. No use growling when your hopes are killed. No use kicking when the lightning strikes, or the floods come along and wreck your dikes. Only thing for a man right then is to grit his teeth and start again. For it's how life is and the way that things are that you have got to face if you travel far. And the storms will come, and failures too, and plans go wrong in spite of all you do. And the only thing that will help you win is the grit of a man and a stern set chin. Well, you know, even in captivity, where we are in captivity, people are so innovative and they create so much. So much. Life is going to change a lot after captivity. Things are going to change because now people have become very independent because they're on their own at home and their own bosses, and they're figuring out how to do things in a different way and discovering things. It's so interesting. So we need our own poets of our time too. But this man still speaks. Even his principles, some of his wording is a little bit different. Than what we would understand today because of his figures of speech and the way they used words. Okay, this is a good one for some of you elderly people. It's called I Ain't Dead Yet. Time was I used to worry, and I'd sit around and sigh and think that every ache I got that I was going to die. I remember that before exercising. I had a kind of a numbness on one side of me that just went down through, and my foot hurt, my knee hurt, my hip hurt, my shoulder hurt. And since I have been doing these stretch exercises in the chair, it's gone. But I remember thinking, oh, I wonder how much more time I have left. Okay. Time was I used to worry, and I'd sit around and sigh and think with every ache I got that I was going to die. I'd see disaster coming from a dozen different ways, and prophesy calamity and dark and dreary days. But I've come to this conclusion, that it's foolishness to fret. I've had my share of sickness, but I ain't dead yet. Now, there's two more stanzas in this, but I want to stop and make a comment about this. I have always disliked the gloom and doomers constantly talking about the end is near. You know, the end is near for everyone because our life is only a breath away. We know that. We know, that we could pass out and pass away within a minute. So people don't need to go around preaching that. There's nothing you can do about it. And it's not a good thing to constantly, like he said, he see disaster coming from a dozen different ways and prophesy calamity and dark and dreary days. And there are some people that I don't know if it's just the way they grew up or the way their mind is set by some kind of influence, who's constantly, they can live to be quite old and still have this attitude and never really stop and enjoy life because they are sure that there's a disaster on the way. And of course, we're living in very difficult times right now, and still we have hope, and Christians always have hope. And I will read a little bit out of this from the government book that I have that talked about how Christianity makes good citizens. Okay, so here's the next part of this. Wet springs have come to grieve me, and I've grumbled at the showers, but I can't recall a June time that forgot to bring us flowers. I've had my business troubles and looked failure in the face, but the crashes I expected seemed to pass right by the place. So I'm taking life more calmly, pleased with everything I get, and not overhurt by losses, 'cause I ain't dead yet. I've feared 1,000 failures, and 1,000 deaths I've died. I've had this world in ruins by the gloom I've prophesied. But the sun shines out this morning, and the skies above are blue, and with all my griefs and trouble, I've had somehow lived 'em through. There may be cares for me, much like those that I have met. Death will come some day and take me, but I ain't dead yet. You know, if you are raising children, or even if you're a grandmother and children are gone, it's not good for children to live in an atmosphere where you're constantly talking about gloom and doom and disaster and calamity and death and the end of the world all the time. This is not a good way. Children deserve a future. They want to grow up, and God wants us to have a life where we grow up and we get married and we have children and we have a business and we get a house and then we raise our own children. And God wants that. That's the cycle of life God wants for all of us. He didn't have us born into this world just to snuff us out right away, and it's not considered natural to do that. And of course, there will be the exceptions where there will be disaster, but we should not be dwelling on it. We should not be talking about it all the time. Remember, I've given you real simple scriptures like Philippians 4:8, where we talk about whatever's good, lovely, pure, and just, and it just changes things so much. And of course, all of us, by the time you get to be my age, uh, you have suffered, life has beaten you up a bit, and you've suffered a lot of losses. But as long as God sees fit to give you breath and life, then we need to live in such a way as to glorify Him, and also to express happiness to others who have come along and need to have hope. We need to express hope. And hope is really the anchor of our soul. The Bible says hope we have as an anchor to our soul. Now, a lot of people hate hope. They don't want hope because they think that if they hope for something and then they don't get it, that they're just doubly plummeted into despair. But what the way you approach hope is, you don't expect to actually get it. You just hope for it, and it's so exciting because even if you don't get it, the hoping was the life's blood. The hoping was the heartbeat of it. And it's like planning for a house. You sit down and you draw some pictures and you draw where you want everything, and you have their floor plans, and you draw on this little piece of paper that has the little squares on it, and you draw these things out. And the planning is so much, so absorbing and so fulfilling that even if you don't ever get that house, the planning it's like being a painter. Uh, I like to paint scenes that I'd like to be in, and often they are more fulfilling than the real thing. But hope is something that you have to have as an anchor for your soul, and you can't misuse it by saying, I'm not going to hope because if I don't get it, I'll be disappointed. That's just a ridiculous way to live. You can't be an American if you don't understand hope. If you don't have hope, that's just not good thinking. That will sink a ship and tear down a nation. That attitude about not hoping because if you get it, you're going to just not be able to stand it if you don't get it. Okay, so today I'm going to also read from American Government and Economics. This might be a rather short talk today, but you can always press continuous play and listen to the one before. Okay. Now, this is rather technical, but see, by the time your child or teenager or younger adult gets finished with it, they'll be very familiar with how things work in our government, and it's not a secret. Our government is not a secret, and we can have knowledge of what our senators are supposed to do and what our representatives are supposed to do and what our mayor is supposed to do. And I've told you before to pay more attention to what's happening on the local level and who those people are. Often they run for office with nobody against them, and there's only one choice. You need to find out who they are and where they live. They often don't have websites. They don't have any, nobody knows who they are. You never meet them, and we need to know what they believe, because they are the ones that can affect your life more than even a president, because they are local, and you need to know who you're. Now, we hire some of our sheriffs, and we elect some of them. We hire some law enforcement, and we elect some of them. So we need to be really careful to know what they believe. Now, okay. Who wrote the America's Creed? His name was William Tyler Page. Now, I read that to you before. I don't think it's in this book, America's Creed, but I read that to you from a little book. I don't have it here with me in this little room. This room is so small it could probably hold 2 books. Okay. Okay, so who wrote the Pledge of Allegiance? The answer is Francis Bellamy. Who said, America is great because she is good, and when America ceases to be good, then she will cease to be great? I believe it was, yes, Alexis de Tocqueville. I have read in past videos about Alexis de Tocqueville and some of the things that he said about the American women in the pioneer times. Who said, whatever makes good Christians makes good citizens? It was Daniel Webster, and we have the original, a reproduction of the original 1828 dictionary. You know, I should really bring that and read that out of that sometime to you, because Daniel Webster believed his words that had definitions, whenever possible, he would use a sentence from the Bible to make you understand the definition of the word. He would just, you know, when we used to learn a word, then our mothers or a teacher would use the word in a sentence so that we could get the context of it. And I'd like to give you more examples of that later. But Daniel Webster would define a word in this dictionary and then put it in a sentence so that you could understand what it meant. So whatever makes men good Christians makes them good citizens. And why is that? Well, just to put it simply, the 2 commandments of Jesus. Love God with all your heart, mind, and soul, and love your neighbor as yourself. Now, if you love God with all your heart, mind, and soul, that takes care of, I think, around the first 4 or 5 of the 10 commandments. If you love God with all your heart, mind, and soul, you won't swear. You won't worship false gods. You won't have any graven images. You won't have any disloyalty to God. And that means, that leads into love your neighbor as yourself. That takes care of the second half of the 10 commandments. You won't be stealing from them. You won't be bearing false witness against them. And you won't be killing them. And so generally, if you want to take those 2 commands of Jesus, love God with all your heart, mind, and soul, and love your neighbor as yourself, and go to the 10 commandments and see how it embodied parts of the 10 commandments. That's Christ's new law, but it took care of the laws of the 10 commandments. So, how does that make good citizens? Well, you're not going to be in any trouble with the law if you love your neighbor as yourself. And I always remembered a quote from The Magic of Ordinary Days, which I've just mentioned earlier. And it was Livy and Ray. And Livy was new in this small little farming area, and she was a little concerned that the neighbors and the people that knew that they had just got married and she'd come from somewhere else, they might be talking about them. And she said, won't they talk about us? And her husband said no. And she said, well, why? And he said, because they want the best for us. So being a good neighbor, you wouldn't spread false things about your neighbor or talk about them in a way that someone would think something wrong. So okay, who said in his, now see, this is interesting because some of these will never be taught in a secular school. Who in his call for prayer said, the longer I live, the more convincing proofs I see of the truth that God governs in the affairs of men? Well, it was Daniel Webster, the same person that said, whatever makes men good Christians makes them good citizens. And so let's read a little bit more out of this, and then maybe I will talk a little bit about things that you should say or shouldn't say in the idea of sympathy, expressing sympathy. So, what name was given to the meetings of the Great Council in England? Parliament. What document limited the English monarch's power once and for all? The English Bill of Rights. Who wrote commentaries on the laws of England? Sir William Blackstone. Rather dour person, I think. I read some of it and thought, don't know about some of that. He was, the Puritans were rather strict people with other people, and I found Sir William Blackstone, although some of his commentaries were very sound, some of them were kind of scary. What became the first permanent English settlement in the New World? Jamestown, Virginia. I have never been there, but apparently there is a place that you can go and where this has been restored as historically as possible, and you can go and tour it and see some of the history. Name the 3 types of colonies established in the New World. Self-governing, royal, and proprietary. What does the author say is an example, the author of this book here, the student's manual too. What does the author say is an example of American democracy in its purest form? Now remember, we're not a democracy. We are a constitutional republic, so we will always go back to the rule of law, and the rule of law is the Constitution. Well, in order to mess us up, because people know they can't persuade us away from the Bible and the Constitution and our local laws, what they'll do is they'll tweak the Bible. They'll say that it means something else that it doesn't, and try to uproot people by that way so they can dominate. And so what they'll do is they've been trying for a long time to get rid of the Constitution, and they said it was archaic and it was an old manual and didn't apply to the new era that we live in, and they've been trying so hard to get rid of it. But now we are restoring some of the things that they have replaced, and the government has tried to get rid of. It's being now restored. But I've noticed that one thing, if you're ruled by law, see, we are a constitutional republic. We are ruled by the rule of law, the Constitution. People will think, well, people that tend to harm you will think, well, if we cannot persuade these people, we'll just change their law. And then they won't be ruled by that. They'll be ruled by what we think, That's something you have to really watch out for. What served as the basis for the central government of the United States from 1781 to 1789? The Articles of Confederation. If you can get a copy of that or go online and read some of them, it was a record of the discussion. It was like the minutes of a meeting, a record of the discussion that took place while they were trying to form what should we put in the Constitution. And they were really interesting because they were saved, then when you read something in the Constitution, you can go back and read what the intent was by the comments that were recorded in these meetings. Okay, who is considered to be the father of the Constitution? James Madison. What name was given to those who were in favor of the new Constitution? The Federalists. What is the name given to the system whereby each of the 3 branches of government has the power to exert restraints on the others? Checks and balances. Now, our 3 branches of government are the representative, the judicial, and the executive. And the executive, you know what an executive is, don't you? It's someone who runs things from an office. an executive. He keeps track of what's going on, and has to know about business. And many of the people that came to be representatives and senators in the olden days, back in the 1800s, were people who had businesses and farms, and they knew how things were run. And they would come, and Congress only opened for a little while, several times a year, and they would leave and go attend and then go back home and do their work. And but now we have representatives and senators that have never run a business, that don't even know how people live, that they just live in a totally different realm, and a lot of other things going on that make them unable to actually represent, which I think is going to be changing as people are waking up to this. What do conservatives believe must be conserved if we are to keep our republic? Eternal values and moral values. That's beautiful, isn't it? So if your child is reading something like this, I think you should get the student manual if you can, American Government and Economics in Christian Perspective by A. Becca, and that's in Pensacola, Florida. If you can get it, they are starting to not be able to keep up with the demand on these wonderful school books here. It was originally created for Christian schools, but the homeschoolers used them, and my children loved them. And what it does is it stretches the mind into maturity at where their thinking is logical, and they don't go through that foolishness. I mean, their foolishness is over after they're children, but as teenagers, instead of going into foolishness, they go into wisdom, and they start to mature and go into adulthood, instead of going through all those wacky stages that teenagers go through this kind of education. They are like John Adams. He was a young man, but he was very astute in things like this. And there's no reason to have that stage of foolishness after they've already grown, after they've already become young adults. And the education is part of it. Okay, so I'm going to talk to you a little bit first about sympathy now. So I'll just start out by some of the things that I've heard that I'm pondering on. I had a day yesterday where I was nearly alone all day. And oftentimes when a person is alone, they start thinking of things that start to analyze things and figure things out that have been a puzzle for many years. They just kind of shrugged it off, but it comes back, and then you think, now I can understand why that bothered me. Okay, so I was really, really young, 20, 21, and I would, and I was married to a preacher, and we lived in the manse often, and sometimes I would say things and we'd be invited out, and the ladies would go to a ladies' class at someone's home, and I'd admire these homes and say, I wonder how I could get a home of my own, because I realized there's so much, the investment is a very good investment, and also at a young age I knew that would be something that would be a source of income maybe later on, and also pass on to your children. It's a good investment, and so I thought it was wise, and certainly wiser than other ways of where you would be less expensive once it was paid for. And so I would ask them questions about, how could I own a home? And I got the most interesting, astonishing answers. And then I realized while I was working around the house yesterday, the reason they said that to me was because they don't look at me as like everybody else. And so I asked about, how would I get a house? And they would say something like, well, you don't really need a house, dear. You have a home in heaven. And that's just that used to aggravate me so much, But I realized they didn't think not everybody else in the congregation had a home. But they didn't look at me like I was like everyone else, human being like everyone else. And Then another thing that I noticed people were doing that was not very sympathetic was if someone died or lost a loved one and needed a little sympathy, somebody would say, inadvertently say something like, they're in a better place now. You know, when you are suffering a loss from somebody, you don't really want them to be in a better place right now. You want them right there with you so you can hug them and kiss them and love them. And they don't understand the sorrow, but to say they're in a better place now, it's okay for you to think that, and it's okay for a preacher to preach that. But as far as personal sympathy and empathy, that is not the right thing to say. I don't think they're in a better place now. No one, because we don't disagree that they're in a better place. We don't disagree about that, but it does not help the need at the moment to say something like that, because we're not when we lose somebody, we're not worried about whether they're in a better place or not. We just miss their presence. We miss them. We miss talking to them. I remember when one of my relatives died, I kept picking up the phone and started to dial their number because it was such a habit. And then at night, I always prayed for them. And then after they were gone, I kept praying for them. And you know, it's hard to if you've known somebody for a long, long time, you need this. You need to sympathy is that you miss them. You really, really miss them. So the best thing to say is that you must really miss them. That must be really hard. Is better sympathy than to say, well, they're in a better place. That, I mean, would you like to say goodbye to somebody suddenly, maybe a young person in your family, and would you personally think, well, they're in a better place? That's not very sympathetic at all. I don't know what you would call that, but there's somebody that doesn't understand real bonding with human beings. Remember the song, For the Beauty of the Earth? There was a verse in there that said, for the joy of human love, brother, sister, parent, child, things on earth and things above, and all gentle things and mild. God gave us people to fellowship with, and he wants us to have the love of a family. So if someone loses somebody, they miss them, and that is the point. That part of their, it's not just that, it's just the effect that that person has had on their life for so many years, and it's probably daily part of their life too. And there's going to be huge amounts of time that will no longer have that person in it. So it's quite, you might look these up about sympathy and empathy. And then the other thing about telling a minister's wife that she doesn't need the same things that everybody else needs. She doesn't need the comforts of home. She doesn't need the same kind of prosperity that other people have, because, quote, you'll have a lovely home in heaven. And yes, we do. We know we're going to have a lovely home in heaven. But in the meantime, we need to be busy taking care of our own houses. And, you know, I can remember back in the olden days, even then, you know, people kind of glorify the 50s and even the 60s, and they'll say how, you know, great people were, but no, they had the same problems. I remember a young lady that had come to church and was there was a ladies' tea that was being held, and they were, you know, because in those days when the women didn't all work, we could get together and support one another, and they all had friendships. And so they weren't alone all the time in their houses. And so one young lady had been married a couple of years, and we were in an era where the prices on things had gotten very, very high. And she wanted to know if anyone had an old dresser or a bed set that she could borrow, that they could use till they could get something of their own. And instead of thinking about how someone could solve this problem, the women, even the older ones, were saying, well, you don't really need a dresser, you could just use a box or something. And this young lady was listening to all this, thinking and shaking her head, and she said, you know, you're right, I don't need any of that stuff, I could just use boxes. And yes, we've all used these kind of things, but what I'm talking about here is what would be the sympathetic thing to say, what would be the helpful thing to say. So these are some things, no matter what generation you're in, It all has to be learned all over again. Every society has to learn it. We haven't gotten any better. And we can learn from the past, but never glorify a previous era, because they had their share of sour people too. And so, ladies, I hope that this has been helpful to you. I realize it's not quite an hour, and I am very happy that you came. I'm blessed that you came, and thank you all for your prayers. Thank you for coming, and those of you who have followed me for a long, long time, I really appreciate it. And I do appreciate the financial donations that some of you have made, because they are very helpful, and they help more than you know. And so, until I'm back again, I hope you have got some success in your day and got some things done. And if you want to leave a comment, I don't always ask for comments, because I know that just takes time. And that's one of the reasons I don't do live stream, is you would have to take time to sit there and watch it, and then I'd have to peer over and read all the comments. So I know we like to be busy, we like to get things done, and I don't want to delay you. But if you would like to leave a comment, I'd like to know what all you got done while you were listening. It's always interesting to me. And so today I'm going to be doing some of my own listening of things that I like, and I'll try to leave you a couple of links of useful things that you can listen to that are political but not disturbing. Okay, and done in such a way as to give you hope. So, ladies, God bless you, and I hope you just have a wonderful day, and your news at home is good, and that you think on things that are lovely, and that you will have no anxiety today about anything. So, I'll talk to you later. Bye.